are live, and we're here with a wonderful little article on identity politics, identity-free identity politics. A report from the Agender, Aromantic, Asexual frontline.
This is a war.
It's the gender war. I already covered that in Gender War Stupidity, but I did forget to add non-binary people, so excuse me for being exclusionary.
A war more manufactured and fabricated than the
Would
war
help
on
if I
drugs.
screen shared too. Okay, there we go. Fix that. So now everybody can see the horror that is the image on this page, because I don't even know what's supposed to be happening in that picture, but it looks weird.
I just scrolled a little bit further down, but the pictures I see aren't really any better.
Okay, so we're gonna read through this and have a little fun at its expense, I suppose. I know that's the wrong thing to do, but oh well. Currently, I say that I am agender. I'm removing myself from the social construct of gender, says Mars Marson, a 21-year-old NYU film major with a thatch of short black hair. Mars Marson, where do you get a name like that?
I don't know, but I'm guessing much like the anti-circumcision proponents. This person restored her name, her true name.
But the whole I'm removing myself from the social construct of gender, it just sounds like I'm trying really hard to be different by saying I don't fit into either category.
Right. What do you accomplish by removing yourself from the social construct of gender?
Freedom,
Other than to
apparently.
posture obnoxiously about how you somehow have it figured out and everybody else is just living lives and paying their bills and majoring in something that actually gets them a job.
Remove the stigma. Marson is talking to me amid a room full of queer union students at the school's LGBTQ student center. How are these things? Okay, I like how queer union is capitalized as though it's, it's like the White House or something. And then you got LGBTQ, LMNOP, QRSTUVZ, I don't
B-
know.
BBG OMG WTF.
The alphabet soup of the student center.
I don't know. Isn't it this comes off as very segregating and discriminatory? Why do you need an LGBTQ student center? I haven't been to too many schools, but there's not an African American student center. There might be a student union, but there's not a student center devoted primarily to them. And much like if there was a white student center, there would be so much ire generated from the fact that that something is created, but because of something as innocuous as sexual orientation, they somehow get a separate and individualized student center for what
Yeah,
exactly?
I don't really understand, because they're still human beings. They're still a part of the school community like everybody else. Why do you have to separate yourself? I'm sure they'll say something like, "Oh, well, because people shun us and they're transphobic and all that stuff, and we
One
need people to share our experience." But
Once again, I go back to the whole there's not an African American student center in any school I've been in.
yeah,
If there were,
it's
they would call that racist.
pretty much where a front desk bin offers free buttons that let visitors proclaim their preferred pronoun. I feel like we should just leave now, because I can't believe that this is the reality that we've decided to create.
I just wonder how they actually do that. Like, do they have just a blank? And they say my prefer, like how you used to
Hello,
have
my
the
name
button that
is.
yeah, but instead my preferred pronoun is blank.
I think that's probably
Or
what it
do they get to
is.
choose he, she, they, or or
Maybe
what?
Maybe they printed up like a whole bunch of different ones, and you get to choose out of the 56 flavors of gender.
That's I guess that's interesting. That's
They also have a jar of mayonnaise right next to the counter too, just in case you just identify as mayo.
yeah. I think I'll pass on that. I'm not a big fan on solidified egg whites.
Can't say I am either. I'm a narrative destroyer. Of the 7 students gathered at the queer union, 5 prefer the singular they, meant to denote the kind of post-gender self-identification Marson describes. That just sounds like a lot of big words in order to say a whole lot of nothing.
Right. I don't understand. I mean, I understand what they're trying to say by post-gender, much like how people said that we were in a post-racial society, but that means absolutely nothing.
What post-gender is just supposed to mean that we're in an era that looks beyond gender, where or something. I mean,
Or that we've recognized that gender is an arbitrary and superfluous concept.
you know what? If it's so arbitrary, they seem to be awfully obsessed with it and being recognized solely based on that.
Oops.
Marson was born a girl biologically. You better be careful because that could be transphobic right there. And came out as a lesbian in high school. But NYU was a revelation, a gender revelation, a place to explore transgenderism and then reject it. Oh, I don't feel connected to the word transgender because it feels more resonant with binary trans people, Marson says, referring to people who want to tread a linear path from female to male or vice versa. I thought that was the whole point of transgender, where you're born as one, but you feel like you're the other, so you transition into it.
All I know is that when I think binary, I don't think linear. But you know, what do I know about exponential functions? So let's just go and continue.
You could say that Marson and the other students at the queer union identify instead with being somewhere in the middle of the path, but that's not quite right either. I think in the middle still puts male and female as the be all end all. You mean, like reality would dictate? Says Thomas Rubano, 19, a sophomore drama major who wears makeup, a turban-like headband, so cultural appropriation, and a flowy blouse and skirt, and cites Lady Gaga and the gay character Kurt on Glee as big adolescent role models.
So this
So,
person has no personality whatsoever.
and you're using like a fictional character as one of your role models. I
Well, Ark from Ark the Lad was one of my role models, but he did stuff.
Probably badass stuff as opposed to Kurt on Glee, who just danced around and sang stupid songs like a bit of a fruitcake.
I mean this guy blew up buildings and destroyed things. So I mean,
I like to think of it as outside. Everyone in the group mm-hms approval and snaps their fingers in accord. So are they appropriating black woman culture? Is that what's happening there?
I don't know. They didn't shake their heads from side to side. So
They're not doing it right. Amina Saeed, 19, a sophomore from Des Moines, agrees. I think that the fact that she is from Des Moines just says that she's really bored with her life and needs a way to stand out. Traditional women's...
That's why they went to NYU, because everybody always tells me, oh, I have to go to New York to experience the culture and everything, because you can't experience culture anywhere else.
No, except Europe, but that's only when you go backpacking in search of yourself.
Right, with your parents' money.
Traditional women's clothes are feminine and colorful and accentuated the fact that I had breasts. I hated that, Saeed says. So now I say that I'm an agender demigirl with connection to the female binary gender.
As opposed to the female non-binary gender.
I just don't even... What's a demigirl?
I just assumed that it was a troglodyte.
Probably a fair assumption. On the far edge of campus identity politics, The places once occupied by gay and lesbian students and later by transgender ones, you now find pockets of students like these, young people for whom attempts to categorize identity feel anachronistic, oppressive, or just painfully irrelevant. So it's irrelevant, yet we're making a huge stink about what their gender and their pronouns actually are.
And the only reason it's anachronistic is because they need some sort of way to feel relevant. I mean, not not to play the what did you waste your money on a degree card here, but I've seen sophomore with maybe no major, a drama major, and a film major, all liberal arts degrees, which all fall in the same larger discipline as gender studies. So a whole lot of nothing, a whole lot of, oh, here's this is the way that we need to think, and we need to, and it teaches we can criticize things by reading things and then just replying back to it, and that's a criticism, and we can use weak facts to argue our point. And it's the nexus for I need something to make myself feel important and matter.
And then we can turn off our comment sections to avoid criticism of our criticism. For older generations of gay and queer communities, the struggle and exhilaration of identity exploration on campus can look somewhat familiar. Why is there identity exploration on campus in the form of gender identity? Like, what does that have to do with going to college?
Or any exploration at all. I used to hate the cliche of you go to college not just to get a degree, but you go to learn and figure out who you are, as though anybody who bypasses the 4+ years of academia will
Never
not
knows
be
who they
able
are.
to understand. Right. They will never know their personal identity because they did not decide to go spend some time on the quad and then go to the campus Chick-fil-A unless they felt it too oppressive, and then decided to go to the campus Starbucks instead to go protest non-issues about the curriculum, which still resulted in nothing ever changing.
That's actually a good point. I don't remember not knowing myself before like college age, or I mean, I would figure that maybe you're confused about some things in your teen years, but you should have a pretty decent grasp of the kind of person you are or that you're slowly growing into. But what do I know?
the the lazy argument is that there will be people from different backgrounds that attend universities, and therefore they can introduce you to things that you've never heard of, when in fact articles like this imply that there are just other people who think like I think, and now I'm able to find them in person, and therefore the way I feel must be right because somebody else feels that way.
Right. It's less about finding opposing views and challenging your ideas, and more about oh, look, common ground. These people validate my existence. I'm right. But the differences today are striking. The current project is not just about questioning one's identity, it's about questioning the very nature of identity. Oh, we're getting very philosophical here. You may not be a boy, but you may not be a girl either. And how comfortable are you with the concept of being neither? Who decided, like, I just can't figure out who made this up. All of a sudden, being a boy or a girl isn't good enough. You have to, if you feel different, it's because you must not be the correct gender. And if you're neither a boy or a girl, well, you got to be something else. Why can't you just be a boy or a girl that happens to act outside of the stereotype of what a boy or a girl is in society?
I mean, this
I
this
thought that was
sounds like
just being an individual.
an 8-year-old who's just exasperated by the fact that he or she cannot cope with the reality of being a social being and dealing with other people who don't appreciate that person, and therefore they have to say, well, there must be something different about me, and drawing their own puerile conclusions, and now somehow this has become a legitimate academic field of study and warrants exploration.
You may want to sleep with men or women or trans men or trans women. Isn't that a fetishizing by their logic? And you might want to become emotionally involved with them too, but perhaps not in the same combination, since why should your romantic and sexual orientations necessarily have to be the same thing? Or why think about orientation at all? Your appetites might be pan romantic but asexual. You might identify as a cisgender. I like how they put in parentheses not transgender, as in, why not just say normal
You know
or typical?
that reminds me of a quote that a professor that I knew had from Bill Maher, where he claimed that he thought that non-atheists were the most uninteresting people on the planet. And I thought that that was a superfluous thing to say because there's already a term for non-atheists called theists.
Yeah. And then aromantic. The linguistic options are nearly limitless. Yeah, because they keep making up words. An abundance of language meant to articulate the role of imprecision and
Imprecision.
identity. I'm jumbling my words here. And it's a worldview that's very much about words and feelings. For a movement of young people pushing the boundaries of desire, it can feel remarkably unlibidinous. Unlibidinous. I don't know why I'm struggling. Must be too much stupid. It's making me drop my IQ,
Well, to be fair,
which is not
to
140.
to be fair, making up all these arbitrary terms and identities certainly makes me want to have sex a whole lot less.
Robin Ox or something, a
Yeah,
former Harvard
probably.
administrator who was at the school for 26 years and who started
And
the school's group for LGBTQ faculty and staff,
and knows all the ins and
sees
outs of it.
yeah sees one major reason why these linguistically complicated identities have suddenly become so popular. Oh boy, here it comes. I ask young queer people how they learned the labels they describe themselves with, says Ox. And Tumblr is the number one answer. Tumblr. So now we're using Tumblr as a legitimate way to create and validate identities. How is that a source for anything?
How what's the validity of that? There's hardly any form of research, whether lazy or actually academic or substantive. So what makes these people think, oh, some random person said something, so it must be true?
I think it's just more of that, oh, here's some people that think like me, and not only do they think like me, but they're giving me labels, and now I have something I can call myself because I feel so lost in the world.
See, this is the problem when you let 14-year-olds have websites.
That's so true. Should have stuck to LiveJournal. The social media platform has spawned a million micro communities worldwide, including queer Muslims, queers with disabilities. I'm sorry, that sounds like a weird fetish website. And trans Jewry? Is that like something invented by Pole?
No, no, because they would hate something like that. So I think
Yeah.
we can definitively say that 4chan would be nowhere near that.
Jack Halberstam, a 53-year-old self-identified trans butch professor of gender studies, nice, at USC. Can this get any more stereotypical?
Yes, it can.
Specifically cites Judith Butler's 1990 book, Gender Trouble, the gender theory Bible for campus queers. I remember when queers was an offensive term. I
I
also
was
remember when it was used as just another way to say weird.
And I remember when it was used to describe people who were lesbian or gay, and now I have no idea what it means anymore.
Quotes from it, much like Like the much reblogged, oh, so now we are using Tumblr terms. There is no gender identity behind the expressions of gender. That identity is performatively constituted by the very expressions that are said to be its results. They have become Tumblr bait, perhaps the world's least likely viral content. What? I'm just so confused by all of this. It's amazing to me that you know, an institute of academics would take this seriously and treat it as if it's valid when the only source is apparently Tumblr.
I guess citations are no longer needed.
But many of the queer NYU students I spoke to didn't become truly acquainted with the language they now use to describe themselves until they arrived at college, which says a whole lot about what they're teaching at schools nowadays. Campuses are staffed by administrators who came of age in the first wave of political correctness and at the height of semiotics deconstruction mania. In college now, intersectionality, there's our favorite term that we don't understand, the idea that race, class, and gender identity are all connected, kind of like New York Telephone used to be. I'm sure nobody's going to remember that commercial. Yeah. Is central to their way of understanding just about everything. But rejecting categories altogether can be seductive, transgressive, a useful way to win an argument or feel unique. Wait, a useful way to win an argument? And then at least they pointed out the feel unique part, because that's what I'm leaning towards.
I think by rejecting categories, they mean just instead of arguing the issue, they talk about straw men and logical fallacies.
Oh, that makes sense.
And disliking and moving on.
I already had one of those. Well, 12, but only one of them felt the need to come out and say it. Even though
well, technically you had 13.
Oh.
You had the original dislike and move on.
Maybe that's too cynical. Despite how extreme this lexical contortion might seem to some, the students' desires to define themselves outside of gender felt like an outgrowth of acute discomfort and deep scars from being raised in the, to them, unbearable role of boy or girl. You've got some problems if that is so bad that it's unbearable. Establishing an identity that is defined by what you aren't doesn't seem especially easy. I mean, or you could just be like an individual and realize that you don't need other people to validate your existence or preferences and just be yourself. You don't need people constantly recognizing your pronouns or something. I mean,
yeah, you don't need buttons where you inform people of your preferred pronouns, which, despite the fact that they're trying to feel unique, 5 out of 7 apparently prefer
identify the same way. Yeah. Well, it's just so weird to me because I grew up in a time that, you know, they said, okay, everybody's an individual, and yet I still saw that there were cliques and there were groups, and if you didn't do a certain thing or like a certain thing, you weren't part of those cliques, and I never was. But I never thought to myself, gee, I really need a special way to set myself apart. I need a whole laundry list of labels that I can throw out there to be like, screw you guys, I'm different.
Yeah, I keep my labels for user interface design.
I asked the students if their new cultural license to identify themselves outside of sexuality and gender, if the sheer plethora of self-identifying options they have, such as Facebook's much hyped 58, now we're up to 58. We used to have 56. We now have 58 gender choices. Everything from trans person to gender queer to the vaguely French-sounding neutral. Okay. Well, I guess I'm not French. Well, actually, anyway, which according to the neutois.com cannot be defined, since the very point of being I'm just going to skip over that word because I'm going to keep jumbling, is that your gender is individual to you, sometimes leaves them feeling as if they're floating around in space, probably because you've gotten to the point where you wanted so many different options that you're now overflowing with them and they don't even make sense anymore or have any meaning. I mean, this last one here, that your gender is individual to you, that doesn't even make any sense. Why even have an identity at all, a gender identity? If it's just you as a person, I mean, why is that your gender? Why isn't that just you as an entire individual? I, f- I feel like I'm in a candy store and there's all these different options. Says Daria Goharian, 22, a senior from an Iranian family in a wealthy DC suburb who identifies as trans non-binary. So is that kind of
So
like a screw you, mom and dad? I'm
yeah, I
breaking
mean,
away from the trust fund.
not to erect another straw man here, but a wealthy, coming from a wealthy family or from a family in a wealthy suburb, and
Gender is your biggest
isn't that
problem.
right? Isn't that the whole patriarchy and privilege in a nutshell?
Pretty much. Yet even the word options, oh my God, can be too close minded for some in the group. I take issue with
Well,
that word, much like I take issue with every other word, says Marson. It makes it seem like you're choosing to be something when it's not a choice, but an inherent part of you as a person. Okay, this is that Marson person that at the beginning of this article said, I choose to be, to not be part of the social construct of gender.
well, if they don't like options, I'm guessing that they were never a fan of any NES games.
No, they skipped that menu. Bored to death. Well, I mean, it really shows with all those labels. I like the caption. Amina Saeed identifies as an aromantic, agender demigirl with connection to the female binary gender. That's the thing we read earlier. Wow. We're almost through this, I think. Levi Back, 20, is a pre-med who was almost kicked out of public high school in Oklahoma after coming out as a lesbian. But now I identify as panromantic, asexual, agender, and if you want to shorten it all, we can just go as queer, Back says. I don't experience sexual attraction to anyone, but I'm in a relationship with another asexual person. We don't have sex, but we cuddle all the time, kiss, make out, hold hands, everything you'd see in a PG rom-com. Back had previously,
Therefore I have sexual attraction to somebody.
yeah, I mean, if you're kissing and you're making out and you're enjoying it, clearly there you're feeling some sort of attraction, however much you want to try to deny it.
But at least
Back,
we have somebody who is not a theater or drama major. We have somebody who's pre-med.
that is true.
Now, my concern there is you have a pre-med student identifying as a bunch of nonsense.
I weep for the future of medical healthcare or healthcare. Beck had previously dated and slept with a woman, but as time went on, I became less interested in it, and it became more like a chore. I mean, it felt good, but it did not feel like I was forming a strong connection through that. I mean, that why does that mean that you're asexual? Couldn't that just mean that the relationship was going south? You weren't connecting on an emotional level, and therefore it showed in your physical, your intimacy as well.
Nope, impossible. Typically, a person who is non-sexual knows pretty early on that they're not interested.
Now with Back's current girlfriend, a lot of what makes this relationship is our emotional connection and how open we are with each other. Back has started an
So, a
asexual
relationship.
right. Back has started an asexual group at NYU. Anywhere between 10 and 15 people typically show up to meetings. Saeed, the agender demigirl, is one of them too, but identifies as aromantic rather than asexual. I had sex by the time I was 16 or 17. Girls before boys, but both, Saeed says. Saeed still has sex occasionally, but I don't experience any sort of romantic attraction. I had never known the technical word for it or whatever. I'm still able to feel love. I love my friends and I love my family. But of falling in love, Saeed says, without any wistfulness or doubt this might change later in life, I guess I just don't see why I ever would at this point. Aromantic.
Well, I think she's doing a service for all of us.
You know, I kind of remember a time where people that didn't care much for romantic attraction went around having sex with whoever they wanted. I remember a time when that was referred to as a slut.
And if you were a man and you did it, apparently that was misogyny.
So much of the personal politics of the past was about insisting on the right to sleep with anyone. Oh, joy. Sex positive. Now the sex drive seems such a minimal part of today's politics. I don't know about that, which includes the right to say you have little to no desire to sleep with anyone at all. When did nobody have the right to say that if that's what they really wanted to say?
I can't think of any time when that was not permissible, but
Which would seem to run counter to the more mainstream hookup culture. I can't stand that it's actually considered a culture. But instead, perhaps this is the next logical step.
and
If
reasonable.
hooking if hooking up has thoroughly decoupled sex from romance and emotions, this
Get
movement
it?
is
Decoupled?
this movement is clarifying that you could have romance without sex. Oh, joy. These
Yes.
relationships just sound so awesome.
Yes, it's totally unfathomable that you could be romantic without sexual intercourse or that you could be sexual without romance. Man, color me surprised.
Although the rejection of sex is not by choice necessarily. So, friend zoned? No. Max Taylor, a 22-year-old
No.
trans man junior at NYU who
That
also
sounds like a superhero son.
yeah, it does. Trans man junior. I wonder what his special powers are. Actually, I kind of don't want to know because this next part, who also identifies as polyamorous, basically a cheap excuse to say, "Hey, I don't want to be tied down to anybody, and I'm gonna sleep with whoever I want." Says that it's
So
been
basically
harder.
a man,
Yeah,
the stereotypical man.
says that it's been harder for him to date since he started taking hormones. I can't go to a bar and pick up a straight woman and have a one night stand very easily anymore. Who would have thought? It turns into this thing where if I want to have a one night stand, I have to explain I'm trans. Poor you. My pool of people to flirt with is my community, where most people know each other, says Taylor. Mostly trans or gender queer people of color in Brooklyn. Brooklyn sounds a whole lot less appealing to me anymore. It feels like I'm never going to meet
Have
someone.
you been to Williamsburg? It's all kinds of unappealing.
I have not. It feels like I'm never going to meet someone at a grocery store again.
Yeah, it's almost like perhaps not taking those hormones might have alleviated that problem, but
Well, that's transphobic, so the complicated language, too, can function as a layer of protection. You can get very comfortable here at the LGBT Center and get used to people asking your pronouns and everyone knowing you're queer, says Zena Becker, Warrior Princess. 20, a sophomore from Evanston, Illinois, who identifies as a bisexual, queer, cis woman. But it's still really lonely, hard, and confusing a lot of the time. Just because there are more words doesn't mean that the feelings are easier. And that right there is a great way to end the article because it proves the point that having all these labels is not even helping.
and for the record, they could have condensed bisexual, queer, cis woman to bisexual.
Right. Even yeah, I mean even if you had to announce woman, bisexual woman, why do we need the extra? What does queer mean in this context here? Because it just seems redundant. But we do have a very handy glossary that this article was kind enough to include. A glossary, the complex linguistics of the campus queer movement. Some things about sex haven't changed and never will, But for those of us who went to college decades ago, or even just a few years ago, some of the newest sexual terminology can be unfamiliar. Below, a cheat sheet. Oh boy. All right. Agender, a person who identifies as neither male nor female. Asexual, a person who doesn't experience sexual desire, but who may experience romantic longing. Aromantic, a person who doesn't experience romantic longing, but does experience sexual desire. Cisgender, not transgender, the state in which the gender you identify with matches the one you were assigned at birth. So, ordinary person. Demisexual, a person with limited sexual desire, usually felt only in the context of deep emotional connection. This one, the demisexual thing, is one of the dumbest things I've ever heard, because to me, this was just a normal person that had morals.
But you know that runs contrary to the apparent hookup culture that exists.
Gender, a 20th century constraint.
Okay.
I feel like that's
All
not the
right.
definition.
Time. Time to break out the dictionary here, and not even for that, not even for that reason. Let's go ahead and yep, we're gonna skip the definition of that, and we're gonna go. Oh man, the etymology of the word says that it probably originated sometime around the 14th century.
Hmm.
Oh, and it comes from Middle English by way of Middle French. Oh, so it is in the 20th century construct. Okay, continue.
Hashtag narrative destroyed. Gender queer, a person with an identity outside the traditional gender binaries. Wait a minute. How is that different from agender?
Gender binaries, are we trying to install some software or something?
I think I got a blue screen of death in my brain.
Oh,
I'm sorry. Did I just see gray sexual? Is that an attraction to aliens?
no, that might have been green sexual.
Well, the grays, I guess, is a more broad term for a person with limited sexual desire. Did we need one?
I guess so.
You know what the gray sexual reminds me of when they put it that way, a more broad term for a person with limited sexual desire. For some reason, I'm getting the image of that the Zoloft commercial, the little depressed blob, and he's like hopping around under the cloudy sky, looking all miserable.
So they're metal slime sexual.
Yes. Intersectionality, the belief that gender, race, class, and sexual orientation cannot be interrogated independently from one another. Then there's my favorite Nutois, agender. So basically, word that's not needed, much like agender. Panromantic. Unfortunately, not a romantic attraction to pans and cookware. A person who is romantically interested in anyone of any gender or orientation. This does not necessarily connote accompanying sexual interest. Of course it doesn't. Pansexual, a person who is sexually interested in anyone of any gender or orientation. So basically someone with absolutely no standards. Well, that
It's the opposite of demisexual or
right,
something.
because we needed an opposite to that, and we needed demisexual, even though that was basically how ordinary traditional relationships usually work. I mean, traditionally, I know that's a foreign concept nowadays. You didn't meet someone and jump right to the sex. You spent time with them, you got to know them, and then maybe later on, if you like each other, you had a little sex. But no, I forgot. That's an entirely different sexual orientation nowadays.
No, I don't know what they call it, but I'm sure somebody will make something up in a couple of minutes.
This is terrible. This is one of the worst articles I've seen yet, and the fact that it's appearing in New York Magazine. I mean, I don't know how how big of a publication that is anymore, but it's amazing that this stuff is getting such prominent media attention when it just sounds like a bunch of nonsense to anybody with half a brain. I mean, it just doesn't seem like any of this is productive, because the people that are supposedly under these labels, they're still confused, they're still unhappy, and they're saying that, oh, just because we have more terms now, it doesn't mean that it's easier to deal with.
Which that mean could have fooled me.
I mean, who would have guessed? Who would have guessed that the solution to life wasn't making up a whole bunch of words? You know, you just have to, ultimately, you just have to learn to be happy with who you are, whether or not other people are going to accept that or not, or identify you the way you want to be identified. I mean, you can't force somebody else to think of you the way that you want to be thought of. All you can do is be yourself and hope that the people that are valuable to you observe for themselves who you are, your characteristics, and appreciate you for them.
So basically, whatever your identity is.
Yes. Well, I mean, I guess that's it for this lovely episode. I have another one we could probably do next time, so we'll be back before too long. Thank you everybody for watching. Leave your comments and
Unsubscribe messages.
yes, unsubscribe messages and hate mail below, and we'll see you next time.